What is happening. So today what I want to speak about is configuring your universal forwarders to connect with your deployment server. Right. So the topic might seem a bit simple, right? So I want to tell you what happened a few years back when I used to be doing professional services for a partner, right? So the customer that bought Splunk don't really have a Ansible or a automation tool, and the customer had around close to 150 odd servers, if I'm not mistaken, and we were tasked with installing the universal forwarders on all the 150 servers because the customer's IT was outstaffed, right? So without a proper tool, we actually ended up spending a few days doing the same thing over and over again, right? Logging into each and every server, running the same script over and over again, and getting the servers to talk with the deployment server, right? Over the years, when I started experimenting with Ansible, I realized that what took like 2 or 3 days, I can do it in like a few minutes. Alright, so Ansible is a tool that I often use because it's quite simple to understand. You don't really need any programming experience to get it to work. So what I want to show you is end-to-end setup of how you can install Ansible and go about configuring a simple Ansible playbook, so that you can install all your universal forwarders. So this is mainly targeted for your system integrators who are new to professional services and would like to get the ball rolling with the customer. So the playbook that I'm showing you, it might look a bit simple. There are many ways to make the playbook much faster, but I want to show you how easy it is to do it. So I'm not really going and doing something more complex. So yeah, if you think that the playbook is quite simple or rudimentary, then yes, that's how I wrote it, and I'll explain how it works. So I do have deployment server setup, right? For this instance, I'm going to configure my Ansible here. So the way you do it is, so this is a Ansible. So this server is Amazon EC2, right? So basically it's a yum setup. So we are going to just do an update here. And then I'm going to install the Fedora project, right? And I'm going to install that one. Okay, Fedora is installed. Now I'm going to update the system again. Right, and I'm going to install Ansible. The installer you can find in how to install it on the internet. I can leave you the link to the website where I found the steps on installing Ansible, but it's pretty straightforward. With 3 or 4 commands you can actually get Ansible installed. So what I'm trying to say is, when you go to a client site, instead of and if the customer doesn't actually have any automation tool, you can actually spin up a server on, or even you can use your own laptop to configure Ansible, right? You don't have to depend on the customer's IT to provide you with a automation tool. You can do it yourself, and then you just have to follow these steps to get Ansible working, right? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create a directory called Ansible, right? So Ansible just needs like a few files, right? It's not complicated to set up, right? The first file that we need is a file called ansible.cfg, right? Ansible.cfg, right? So what it's all about is, you can tell on ansible.config where your inventory file is, and then if you want to check the key for the host, right? There are hundreds of different settings that you can add on the config file. So for this video, I'm just sticking to the basics, right? So we created the config file. Now the next thing is, we need to add all the servers, right, the customer have, right? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to spin up a few instances, right? So I just need basic setup here. So I'm going to like spin up 10 instances here. Storage I'm going to leave default. I don't need tags. And launch. Right. So if you are working with the Amazon instance or an Amazon environment, you have to get the key file from your customer, or you need to get the login from the customer. So if you're working with on-premise Splunk instance or on-premise servers, get a user account which have sudo privileges from the customer, so that you can actually use that user account for logging into all the servers, right? So here I have only an Ansible instance, Amazon instance. So I'm going to select the key method, right? I'm going to launch the instance. Okay, so we have 10 instances running, right? So the next thing, so let's say what I'm trying to do here is, I'm going to replicate how a customer's environment will look like, right? So this customer have like 10 different servers, and now this is the server that you have your deployment server running, right? So if you check here, we have the forwarder management which is empty right now, right? So now we are waiting for these servers to spin up, right? So there's a small script that you can find online where you can run from your machine, and it will tell you all the private IP addresses of these servers. So I am collecting the private IP address because they are all on the same VPC, right? So I have AWS CLI configured, right? So that is why I can run this command. So in your environment, if you want to run this command, you have to get AWS CLI configured, or if you're working with the on-premise deployment, you work with your IT to find out all the IP addresses of the server that you are targeting, right? So if you run a command like this, it is going to output all the private IP addresses, right? So I got the full list of private IP addresses, right? Now I know out of this 11 IP addresses, one is my deployment server, right? So that is 172.31.15.139, right? So that is my deployment server. So these are the other private IP addresses that I have to configure, right? So coming back to this server, right, now we have to create a file called host, right? So inside this host file, you can create a few settings like this. So what I'm saying on the first line is, I'm telling what should be my private key, right? I define my private key, and on the second one, this is like a group, right? And inside the group, you just follow this pattern, this line, and then you can create the config file, right? So basically this is a server name, this is the host private IP, and what is the username, right? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to replace all these values with the actual value, and we can populate this host file. So I have the host file configured. You can use multiple ways to create your host file. If, for instance, let's say you have like hundreds of private IPs, like you can run a bash script, or you can get you can like export data from your customer's asset management system to the host file. But basically this should be the format how it should be written. So we have the group and we have all the servers, right? So we are going to save this, and now the last thing that we need is we need to import the key file, the same key file that we used for when we created the servers, right? So I have the key file with me here. Let me just bring that file in. Okay, so right. So I have the key file in here as well, right? So I have the config, I have the host, and I have the key file. Now what I have to do is write the Ansible playbook. All right, so I'm going to do like this: touch ansible.yaml, right? And then I'm going to write the playbook, right? So Ansible actually uses YAML for as a language, right? So it is not really difficult to get if you have been reading a few documentation. You can actually understand what all this is all about, right? So the first answer, what I'm going to do is I'm designing a name, right? I'm telling what all host I have to configure. So this is the group that we defined on the host file, right? And we are just gathering the facts. And then Ansible works in tasks, right? So basically what a task is all about is inside a playbook what all tasks have to be completed to get your thing done, right? So that is a concept that Ansible follows, right? So the first task that we are doing is like downloading the Splunk Universal Forwarder, right? And then we done the first task. So the second task should be, once we have the Universal Forwarder installed, we can install the Universal Forwarder. So we are using a program, inbuilt feature called yum, right, to install the Universal Forwarder from this location, right? So once that is done, so the next task should be so we have to install Splunk, and once that is done, we have to start Splunk, right? So we are just going to say like, okay, start Splunk start, like this, right? So what I done is I'm doing a no prompt, and then I'm just going to seed a password, so I don't have to type the password in during install, right? So that one is done. So now we have downloaded the Universal Forwarder, we installed the Splunk server, now we started the service, right? And now next thing that we have to do is we just have to enable boot start, right? So I'm going to enable boot start, right? So that is done. want to quickly change something here. Right, so boot start is done. Right, so the next command should be we make this a deployment client. Right, so how we done it is we do this, and then we are using the command line prompt to set the deployment client, like set deploy poll, and then this should be my deployment server's IP. Right, so we replace this with our original deployment server's IP, so that is this server's IP. Right, so that is this IP here, 172.30.115.139. right, so that is done. And then the auth part is the universal forwarders authentication, so this is what we defined here. Right, so we done that, and then final step is, once we done that, we do a restart. Right, right, so we write like this, we do at Splunk restart. Right, so just remember, this is a very rudimentary form of writing playbook. You can use something called the Jinja to write the same playbook. So that basically what it means is all these commands you can write it as part of one task. Like you don't have to like define a new name and then write like this. You can just use one task to write everything together. But then just for people that are new to Ansible, just for you guys to understand, I splitted everything up so that it's easier to write. But then do you invest some time in learning how Ansible works? It's very simple to learn. I got the hang of it maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. It's not that difficult to understand. Right, so once you get the hang of it, you can actually write really good playbooks with this. Okay, so we done everything. Right, and then we just save. Right, so that's it. So now what we are going to do is Ansible playbook, and then we are going to call this Ansible playbook done. So this is running the playbook. So this is gathering all the facts. Right, so we are downloading the universal forwarder from the cloud. Right, oh yes, we need to be root for running this. Okay, so for installing what it's complaining about is it needs to be root to perform that command. Right, so let's just make this change here, state right. Right, become true, become user root. Right, so if you run into this, right, it's quite easy to understand where which task failed. Right, it will tell you which task actually failed here. Right, so it's install Splunk servers. That's why I could figure out it failed on this step. Right, so I'm going to run this again. Hold on. So I actually made a mistake on the yum feature. It's actually became is equal to yes. Right, so it was not became true. It's became yes, right? So then we do like this, and now we run it again. So we can see that installers have started, right? So we downloaded the Universal Forwarder, we installed the Splunk servers, we started Splunk, right? Started Splunk, we did boot start, right? We made the deployment server, right? And then we started Splunk, right? And then everything is good, right? So just one thing that you can that I want to point out. So everything that you see as green are things that are not changed, right? And everything that is yellow is the things that change. It's a task that are running for the first time. All right. So what happened is I ran the same playbook twice because of that error, and that's why it is showing as green. And if you find it as yellow, that means it is running for the first time, right? So according to our playbook, everything is sorted, and then we should see all the forwarders calling the Splunk deployment server, right? So let's see what happens here. So let's just refresh the page, and we have all the forwarders calling the deployment server, right? I never logged on to the endpoint. I never had to do anything fancy on the endpoint. All I did is run the Ansible playbook from here, like this, and then all the deployments of all the endpoints actually had the Universal Forwarder installed, like Universal Forwarder installed. They got installed, and then I enabled the boot start. All those settings are done. I made it a deployment client, and I finally restarted, right? So once you get it here, right, you can put in your apps, and then you can do all your fancy stuff from here, from the deployment server, right? So what should have taken me like maybe 1 hour to log into each of these servers, it took me like only like 10 minutes to write the playbook and just install it, right? So you can give it a try, right? So there's a few things that might change on your environment, like the if you check here, if you check on the Ansible config file, you might need to so these are this host file, so you can name it like whatever you want for the host, right? And then inside the host file, if you are using on-premise servers, right, you might need to like define the password, right? Or you need to like define a private variable file and then define the password there if you're using on-premise, right? So I'm using it on Ansible, I'm using it on AWS. So for me, I'm just using my key, the same key that I used on same key that I used when I configured it on my EC2, right? So that's why I didn't have to define my password. But then if you're doing it on premise, you have to like define it with your password. See, this is the key that I used when I set up the Ansible, the servers on EC2, right? So yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, if you're new to the environment and if the customer doesn't seem to have any of these automation tools, you don't have to rely on them and then sit and do it manually. You can just install Ansible on your private machine or even on your local machine or one of the customer's machine, and then just set it up and then configure everything to to work with your deployment server. So for the customer, the return of investment is faster. For your engagement, it is faster because you can finish up all your tasks and leave, right? So it will give you, the customer and yourself, a better experience, right? So the different things that you can use Ansible for, like I've done a previous video where I've been setting up a cluster entirely using Ansible only, right? You can check that video out if you like. There are many tasks that Ansible can be used for, right? So yeah, give it a shot. And there are good videos on Udemy that you can follow, and then you can learn Ansible. I can give a few suggestions on the description as well, so you can check it out and then you will get a better understanding of how this works. So yeah, that's it for today. I'll be back next week with another topic. Thanks guys.